always fortunate to talk about the sports media world with this guy. He's one of my favorite guests to get on the show. He is a one of one. He is one of the preeminent sports media reporters, has a podcast as well with John Ourand. He is Andrew Marchand, who hangs out with us on the show today. I want to start with the most recent news, and that is Tony Dungy. What had been talked about a couple of weeks ago becoming official, with Dungy being let go from NBC. And Frank, look, for me, it's good riddance. He's one of the most anti-LGBTQ plus people in the entire sports media industry, so I have no problem seeing less of him. But from the media perspective of it, he's 70 years old. Take all the stuff that I'm talking about and put it aside. He's 70 years old. The last time we saw him on TV, he was getting undressed by Rodney Harrison on the whole Hall of Fame thing. It just kind of felt like it was time, wasn't it?
It does. The thing with Dungy, and he was kind of a little bit milquetoast, is that when you're going on the air and your goal is not to say too much, that's not a good place to come from. Like, he was okay. He did win a Super Bowl. He is in the Hall of Fame, I believe, and but he wasn't electric. You weren't tuning in at 7:30 after all the games on Sunday and saying, I wonder what Tony Dungy thinks. He was there. So the idea that they're moving on from him, it's not surprising. I think they've thought about this for a couple of years. A couple of years ago, I think they almost did it, and now they do it.
From the NBC side of things, just for a moment, I feel like they've never been in a better position than they are right now. Between the Olympics, I love what they're doing. The NBA on NBC has me captivated. Call me nostalgic, all that stuff. I am bought in. I have watched more NBA regular season games this year, especially the stuff on NBC, because I love what they're doing with it. And I like what Amazon is doing as well. But now they add baseball. We're going to have Sunday Night Baseball in America. And I know some people aren't crazy about the fact they're not bringing in an analyst for that. It's just Jason Benetti and then, a rotating cast of whoever's local to that market. How do you feel overall about where NBC is in the whole sports media zeitgeist?
Yeah, I think the Olympics and the Super Bowl were about as big as you can get. When you think of the biggest events in sports over in the world, the Super Bowl and the Olympics, I think you'd probably put the World Cup in that category as well. But to have those and have Mike Tirico call Super Bowl, then be in Italy and hosting, you just saw it. I thought really what Molly Solomon, who's the head of their Olympic coverage, what they've done with the Olympics has really kind of brought it to a new level. You can watch everything live. They've kind of brought it to the modern era. You got digital, you can watch everything live. But then if you want, for 2 weeks or a little more than 2 weeks for the Winter Olympics, you kind of have a Netflix-like binge watch where they tell a story every night. And yes, is it a little bit sanitized and, yada, yada? Maybe. But it's enjoyable. And then you add the NBA. They paid a lot for the NBA. But I agree. There is something, maybe I don't want to sound old ever, but maybe we're a little bit older. And it's just something about it being on broadcast TV makes it feel bigger. There's something special about that. Maybe it brings us back to the Jordan years. I don't know exactly what it is. You're right. They have leaned on nostalgia. But I think when you talk about these broadcasts and these streams, I think the play-by-players are really where it all starts for your enjoyment. And, Tirico's very good. Noah Eagle is a rising star. You talked about Amazon Prime Video. They did really well. Ian Eagle, to me, is the best going on basketball. Kevin Harlan, Michael Grady. So they all got that correct. And I think when you do that, the rest flows, because ultimately there's a lot of focus on the studio shows, but it's the games that we really care about.
Andrew Marchand of The Athletic as well. I almost forgot. He does that too. Sam, go ahead.
Andrew, we're obviously coming off of a run of few days in every NFL calendar known as scoop season, right? When free agency opens and the legal tampering window opens. I saw a very interesting unofficial study on the internet between who got to scoops first, and Adam Schefter was blowing out of the water essentially the rest of the competition this year. But classically, I thought of Schefter and Rapoport as the two who had raced to a scoop. It feels like Schefter is now miles ahead of anybody else. How have you seen the evolution of the race to scoops in the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, I think with social media, especially Twitter, it's changed because, you're talking seconds. And it used to be, if you had a scoop, before the internet, the other people, you had a day, you had to catch up on a scoop, and then you'd start that next day at the same starting point on the finish. Now, seconds later, someone can confirm. So, look, I think what Schefter and Rapoport, to me, the real stories that are broken, Jason started off with Tony Dungy. For me, Dungy confirmed the news this morning, but I wrote it a couple weeks ago. To me, that's when you break the stories. You tell people things that the people you're writing about or the entities you're writing about don't necessarily want you to write about. So I think the skill that Schefter has and then what he really brings to ESPN is the oxygen he puts into those shows. Because when you have breaking news and the information you can have, I think a few years ago he did really well with Tom Brady, where he was on Monday Night Countdown, and he said something about him leaving. And Ian O'Connor had written some things, and I think some others had mentioned as well. But Schefter started putting some of the things together early. So, yes, there is something to say Tom Brady's going to Tampa. That is something. There is some value in that. But the real value to me is when you tell me stuff early and where things are going. And I think if you listen to Schefter, I think in the social media age with ever so much scrutiny on all these guys, I think what he does a really good job of is giving you a lot of context beforehand. Twitter, if somebody wins by 15 seconds because an agent's texting them, I'm not as impressed with that. But the insight that you get, the little nuggets, those are to me, and Schefter's excellent at it.
Andrew Marchand's hanging out with us. One more segment with him next. Another segment with the great Andrew Marchand of The Athletic. Sam, you had a follow-up on the topic we were just talking about scoops and who gets what.
Andrew, I think the whole, nature of scoop journalism, like you were talking about in an internet age when you're trying to beat somebody by mere seconds, it's just a fascinating concept. And within it all, it seems like, especially over the last few years, there have been rivalries developed, right? Whether they're real or made up, whether we've seen them fight in a Starbucks or not. I'm curious, how do you feel? Like, my question is as simple as, do all these guys just hate each other at this point?
I don't think everyone hates each other, but it is competitive. And, people, they want to win. And so, look, the way I've looked at it,
is the can I interrupt? Can I interrupt and just ask you one thing? Is the pressure so high from above that it causes that competitiveness?
Not necessarily. Well, look, at the end of the day, Adam Schefter makes nearly $10 million a year because he has a million scoops. And, they're worth a lot to the entities. So I think if he weren't coming in first all the time, then I don't think that he'd be making what he's making. So I guess there's rivalries. Now, different people handle it differently. I mean, when you cover baseball, I covered the Mets, I covered the Yankees in New York. At the peak, the Yankees had 11 people covering the team full time. 11 people. I was at ESPN at the time.
Yeah.
Wall Street Journal, New York Post, Daily News, Times back then. So 11 people. At that point, there are 25 players on the team. So, and when you look at it, the Yankees had more than most. There's probably, on the Yankees, because again, they're a little bit different, there are probably 13 players you want to write about. The starters who play every day, but especially A-Rod and Jeter. And then, you have 5 pitchers, you got Mariano in the bullpen, and, there's other guys. That's competitive. And so some people would handle it, and they hate everybody, on board. I personally, I'm very competitive, want to win, tried to win every second. But if someone had a good story, I try to, tip my hat and say, hey, good job. Because when I was a young guy on the Met beat, I remember and this is a little bit, internet was there, but it wasn't as, there wasn't social media back then. TJ Quinn was covering the Mets for the Daily News, and a lot of nights. So, we didn't, at that point, you weren't just throwing everything on the internet right away. So a lot of nights, and I was young, and he'd been doing it for a while, and he's very good. I'd have a nice double in the gap. I felt like wake up the next morning and TJ hit one in the upper deck, and it's just like, and so but I would be like, hey, good job. So I guess to answer your question, very competitive. People handle it differently. You can judge how you think, you should handle things. I think you should give people credit if they beat you. And, I get it. It's hard. When Woj, was at his peak and he's breaking every story. I don't know if I'm an insider for another entity. I want to say every 5 seconds, Woj had this first. So I could see that being a problem, because that, where you got to get to your question, Sam. Yeah. Then your bosses do notice that if you're always second. You gotta get some wins.
Let me ask you, this next NFL rights deal, that they want to, it sounds like they want to get it done before the 2026 season. I saw you recently commenting on, this idea that some of these media entities, one of these broadcasts, they're just going to say it's too much money for us, and trying to figure out where that line is. How much is too much, is the way I heard you sort of phrase it. What does that mean for you as you sort of watch this all play out in terms of who might be in and who might be out, and how drastically that landscape might be about to change?
If I were to predict, I actually don't think that any of them will say no, but there is a number they will say no. Like, you can't, the NFL, they're already paying most of them are paying about $2 billion. ESPN's paying $2.7 billion. Amazon's paying $1 billion. These numbers are going to go up. There is a number where, again, it's not infinite. They can't just say, we'll take 10 billion from you and okay. And the number's obviously lower than that where they would have to say, nope, this does not make sense. Yes, the NFL is by far the most important programming we have, but we won't have a business if we do this deal. So I've said this a number of times. I think the NFL should be greedy, but not too greedy. I think the system they have with the networks, with Amazon, maybe sprinkle in YouTube and Netflix a little bit more. That makes sense to me, because I think you always have to look, like, I think whenever you do a contract, you have to think about, what does this mean for the next contract? And if you get, and then they're not going to do this, at least not this time around. If you get a little too reliant on streaming at this point, the streamers do not need the NFL. They want the NFL. They like the NFL, but they don't need it.
Really?
YouTube.
Wow.
Well, YouTube's $1 trillion company.
Yeah, that's true.
So is Prime Video. So is Netflix. They've done that without the NFL. So there's no proof that they need the NFL. Now,
but if anybody could outbid and pay whatever the NFL wants, they can, if those TV partners on the broadcast side say no.
No, you're right. And well, that's the leverage. And that's where the rub is. And so will they try to ask for double and say, these networks have to pay double? That's not in their budgets. And the other thing that people need to understand, so these deals that they signed, they're only in their fourth year of 11-year contracts. At the end of the decade, there's some are a little bit different than others, but at the end of the decade, they have opt-outs. Mm-hmm. The NFL saying, no, let's do the opt-out now, start paying us more now.
Right.
So you're buying out those other years. So in theory, maybe it's a little bit less, because they don't have the full leverage. Because these networks could say, no, you have opt out at the end of the decade. We're not doing a deal now. That might not be good for them long term. So they might want some more cost certainty. We'll see where they go, but I have a feeling it's going to work out well for the NFL.
I want to continue this just for a couple extra minutes on the podcast side of things. Andrew, always appreciate you, my friend.
Thank you.
Just to continue that, though, for a second.
Yep.
How much does this play into what I originally texted you about why I wanted you on, which is the FCC getting involved now and saying, hey, you guys are moving all this stuff to streaming, and it could shut out broadcast. It's gonna harm broadcast companies. The ABC, CBS, Foxes. How much does that wind up playing into it if the NFL does play hardball, say we want all this money, and the FCC says, wait, you can't move everything to streaming?
Yeah, well, I think the government being involved is definitely a factor, and how heavily they get involved. Brendan Carr, the FCC chairman, tweeted about it recently.
Yeah.
And look, I think the NFL, though, they're the big bad NFL and they have all the leverage, but I do think they have a pretty good story to tell in terms of how their games are available. I mean, 85% of their games are on broadcast TV. If a game's on Thursday Night Football on Amazon Prime Video, or if a Monday Night Football game's on ESPN, just ESPN, it's on locally.
Yes.
So I don't know. Like, yes, if they change the model, then then maybe they might have a issue. But I don't really think when you look at what the NFL offers right now, they offer a lot of their programming, the majority of it by far, on broadcast TV. So yeah, it could be an issue if they tried to change things up, but they're not going to do anything like, all right, let's be extreme here a little bit. All right, let's just say Fox or CBS were to lose their packages, because that's where the multiple games are, the broadcast where you focus. So again, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but if you were to tell me the entity in streaming that would do that, it would be YouTube. And what does YouTube offer? Well, it's free, number one. Number two, so it could geolocate, so you don't have to. So they wouldn't change that to a paywall. So really, and younger people like YouTube more than the older people who don't know YouTube as well. Even though most people do, have a pretty good understanding of it. But they might struggle with it. But then you find out it's free, and that makes a difference. It wouldn't be on YouTube TV, their cable-like system. It would be on YouTube. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I think the NFL knows that they're not going to be putting the AFC, it's not exactly the same now, but the AFC or NFC package on Netflix. Netflix doesn't want that. It doesn't make sense. It's for a number of reasons. I don't think it will be on Prime Video either. So the only one could be YouTube, which I don't think is impossible for that to happen. Like, I think that's possible. I'm not saying it's going to, but that's the one that's but that's free. And that's, I think, a big difference than when you really try to break things down. And you could even argue that one's even more accessible to people than broadcast TV.
Sam, did you have something you want to add?
Yeah, Andrew, I wanted to ask you a little bit about influencer culture in sports media as a whole, and kind of what it's doing to sports media. Obviously, there was the big thing at the NBA All-Star game where they let however many 100 influencers come and be press for the NBA All-Star game. You followed that up with there was that press conference in Denver, I believe it was, where there wasn't a single legacy media member in a post-game press conference to ask a player a question. How do you feel? What is your read on the kind of introduction by the NBA of influencers into the role that the press have historically played? And do you think that's something that we could start to see across other sports?
Well, number one, I'd say they're not the same thing. Just as like what I do when I'm reporting is not the same thing as what you guys do when you have a show where you're opining on stuff. So it's not the same thing. So, I mean, if you're doing a 1-for-1 switch, and I don't even know if that's the NBA's plan, I don't really think it is exactly. I think they want to add the influencers. Then that doesn't make sense. And the influencers asking questions, I mean, you go back in the day, Sam, you're going to be too young for this, but there was a show, Inside Stuff, with Ahmad Rashad and Will Obey.
Yeah.
And they used to do, these soft type of features, which is, they weren't alone. Other people did too. So that's what I would say the influencers are doing. They're going to ask you about, what breakfast you have and, kind of
what's your favorite video game.
Reporters do those kind of stories as well. And those sometimes do well. I guess what, again, it's only sports. I take what I cover and who I cover seriously because you owe it to the people you cover, but it is only sports. It's not that serious. That said, it is not good. I think it's better when you have people who are asking harder questions, because I think what gets lost, I know you guys don't do this, but the people who just bang on the media, and there's certain people who are in your field who love to just bang on the media, and like, where do they think the stories that they always talk about come from? Like, when like inside information, they basically almost always come from media members who are doing the hard work with that stuff. And so media is not perfect. I mean, there's a larger discussion about mainstream media and where we are. And I don't really like the term fake news and all that stuff. There's not by no means perfect, but I do think something will be lost when your team's not covered the same way. I mean, it's just, this is bigger in, the real world in terms of politics and local news being destroyed. Because when there's no accountability for politicians or for people, that's why we have the fourth estate. Like, that's what it's about. So to get to your question, influencers aren't doing that. They're, people love to say when you're writing a story, you're doing this for clicks. And it's like, no, the people who are the influencers, they're doing it for clicks. I mean, that's the difference. Now, and they might be positive clicks. They might be like, oh, we're going to look past anything negative and we're just going to ask because we just want this to work out well for everybody here. Fine. But so overall, I can understand if I'm the NBA, but I probably maybe would separate those things. I wouldn't put them in with the reporters. If you can, maybe give the influencers a little time with the players. But, the players only have so much time for it. And there's also professionalism. I mean, a lot of these people are also fans as opposed to reporters. And again, it's in vogue to just rip on media and say how terrible we are. We're just human beings like anybody else. I mean, at the end of the day, we're not like some foreign beings or something.
I thought it was so interesting, the kind of how you broke down how, the influencers are there to kind of just do the nice features. And it reminded me of something. We're seeing a continual switch, especially in Major League Baseball, to teams running their own broadcasts, right? You're going to see multiple teams, including my beloved Washington Nationals, start to do it this season. That also comes within, sports reporters across the country having their jobs cut continually, and the teams picking up some of those reporters to do in-house reporting. Do you think that with all of this going on and with more teams starting to pick up their own broadcasts, there will be a consistent lack of hard questions being asked to these athletes and Major League Baseball players or Major League Baseball managers this year?
Yeah, look, I think less media, less hard questions. I mean, I think that there's a misnomer too about the media. Like I say this sometimes to people. But 80% of the time, we're probably going to be in agreement. Like, I'm writing something either positive or it's something that's just like, and then there's like 10%, there's a gray area, and then there's 10% you're going to like not like me and we're going to disagree. So the idea that the media is out to get everybody or whatever, basically PR, arms for these places a lot of times. And really what our job is to reflect what's going on. I was doing a story on your show, I would want to try to understand from your point of view what you guys are trying to do. So I could reflect what, you come in every day and are trying to achieve. And then maybe I'd have my own opinions. Maybe I talk to other people, maybe a district, whatever. But the point being is that that's our job. And again, when you talk about this stuff this way, people are like, it's just sports, who cares? They're not totally wrong when they say something like that, but I think they don't realize this is how you find out things. This is how you're, and I would say this for anybody in your position, in my position, the best thing that can happen to you is to be written about or talked about, because the second that happens, you understand, especially when people get it wrong, how important it is for you to try to be 100% correct on everything you say and be fair to people. Because there's nothing worse than when you read something that's 100% untrue about yourself. I mean, there's things worse than that, quite honestly, but it's very frustrating to read that or hear that. And for me personally, having dealt with not you guys, but talk radio type people, and you get in these little things, and they have a lot of airwaves, and they just make up stuff, and they want. They get to just make up stuff, and then you have your facts that you're just going on. Again, I've been through it a number of times, so I don't really care at this point. But the point being is that to your question is that it's not good because you want the accountability, you want to understand what's going on with your teams. And it's better for those franchises if they're getting asked the questions. And the one thing I will say in their defense, though, is there are times, and because all reporters aren't great, and so there are times where there's someone asking questions who doesn't know what the heck they're talking about, and that can be very frustrating. That's what we get also with the influencers too. You kind of can get that as well. So, I mean, it's not perfect. Like, that's the thing. We're not perfect. We're reporters. We're not perfect.
Is the RSN model dead outside of New York, Boston, D.C., Chicago, LA. Is the RSN model officially dead?
I mean, it basically is. I mean, FanDuel.
And that pains me because I'm on RSN, so I'm not saying this with any degree of joy.
Yeah.
Like, it hurts me. But
yeah, you got some onions singing on RSNs.
Yeah.
Look, I don't think they're fully dead.
You could say they're dead. You're not going to hurt my feelings.
It's not. Well, no, I don't know if they're fully dead. I mean, the thing that's going to be an issue, Major League Baseball, for example, wants to have all 30 teams under one local roof, to be able to sell subscriptions. And maybe they'll get a big check from somebody to do that. That's possible. But that business doesn't necessarily fully work as well as the RSNs. Probably doesn't, because the RSNs back in the day, Sam's a Washington National fan, and they are having a bad year, and it's August, and you had cable TV and an RSN. You don't turn off your cable. You keep, all right, I'm not watching the Nationals. They're not good. So you don't turn it off. If you have this streaming service this year and the Nationals are on pace to lose 100 games and it's August, you think you might just say, you know what? I'm going to save my $20, $25 per month, and that's it. So now they just lost $50. And the problem with that is that once you lose Sam or someone, it's hard to get them back, because then you come in the next year, it's like, you know what? Kind of lived without that. And they're on NBC every once in a while. They're on an Apple game I have, whatever. I listen to on the radio. I read The Athletic, whatever. It's enough for me. That's not good over time. And so maybe, I would say that, an Amazon Prime Video, an ESPN, a YouTube, they might be able to solve the issue. And maybe it works eventually, because you need to bundle these things. It needs to be where you're not thinking about every minute if should I get rid of this system? Should I not have this platform? Because that's not really sustainable. So I don't know, baseball going it alone, I don't think really probably works fully. But they're part of a bundle. Especially, I think you need to make that price point less than $10 a month if it's possible. Because if it's an add-on on ESPN, less than $10, Sam, I think you might stick with it. You know what?
Definitely.
It's August, okay, but it's only $9. All right, I'll watch a couple of games. I want to see a prospect come up, and they're just not going to think about it. As opposed to, you get the $20, $25, that's a dinner out, and that's budgets are real, and so Jason, the RSNs aren't doing great. I'm not going to officially say, go to the coroner, but they're not doing great.
Yeah, no. That's why I love T-Mobile. My T-Mobile package gives me the MLB. It's the greatest thing about T-Mobile in this world.
Not anymore, they don't.
They do for this year.
Yeah, they do.
No, but it's only half of it, isn't it? Don't you still have to buy the other half?
No.
I don't think so. I think it's the whole thing.
Oh, wow, that's tremendous.
Yeah.
I was under the impression that they were only going to give me the... interesting. I thought I still had to buy a secondary subscription in addition to what T-Mobile gave me.
No.
That's great.
T-Mobile's the greatest. Last thing, because I've kept you long and I appreciate you. Is ESPN cool with where this Stephen A. Smith is politically, sort of dividing his time? Do they hope he runs for office? Do they hope he doesn't? Like, where is this right now when it comes to what are the people you talk to and the people behind the scenes as far as Stephen A. Smith is concerned right now?
Number one, Stephen A. is not going to run for office. He said it recently. I wrote it last year. He's making too much money. His salary is going to approach $40 million this year when you add everything up. And that's just too much to give up. He's made a lot of money, but not that type of money, until recent years. So he's not going anywhere. He does want to have a voice, kind of like a Joe Rogan type in terms of politics. Yeah. He likes that. I think in an ideal world, the ESPN would not want him to be talking politics. It's not really great for his brand, for its brand. Politics are very divisive. I think you could argue it spreads you too thin He's already talking about college hoops right now, where he's not watching those games. You would presume, there's only so many hours in a day. Now you're going to talk about politics too. If I were him, I would hire somebody for $250,000 or $500,000 who's really, really, really good, and have them checking everything I'm going to say politically. Here's my thoughts. Give me some, and maybe he does have this, but give me, the most coherent information. And he probably maybe has that already. But yeah, ideally no, but they want Stephen A. Stephen A. wants to do that, and Stephen A. is important enough to them for them to allow that.
We made it through a half hour, and I didn't even bring up Pat McAfee once, which means he's doing something right. We did all right. We did all right, Andrew. I can't thank you enough. I always appreciate you. You know that. And I always say one of the best relationships I made in the last 18 years in this industry was you. And I appreciate you. Thanks for coming on with us.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Thanks, Sam.